Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment, for the Sony Alpha A7. Now this is one of two full-frame mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras that Sony launched at the end of 2013. The other is the A7R, which is higher resolution and significantly more expensive. But let's focus on the A7 that this review is all about. We're looking at the lightest full-frame mirrorless interchangeable lens camera ever made, and also the most competitively priced. The only other option in the market is made by Leica, and it comes in at a cool $7,000. So the $1,699 you'll pay for the A7 in its body-only form, or $2,000 to get the actual kit, which is this kit lens that I'll be talking about a little bit later, which is a decent performer, I would say, for one of the first offerings in the brand new FE lineup, FE standing for full frame E-mount lens, and that's because part of the beauty of the brand new Alpha 7 and 7R is that they are built on Sony's E-mount. So for those of you who thought that the E-mount was just something for NEX cameras, which are now becoming, of course, Alpha cameras, clearly Sony always had far greater plans for E-mount than probably most thought. You can see that full frame sensor is simply gigantic, and this is the bridge between traditional NEX cameras, which are now Sony's Alpha mirrorless compact cameras that are soon to be announced sometime this quarter, I would imagine, at least some models. The point is that this is that segue to the professional, or at least semi-professional level that the NEX lineup was always missing. So not only do we have full frame performance now, 24 megapixels, the same sensor found in the A99, the RX1, the RX1R, we have better processing and software to boot, as well as a complete redesign when it comes to ergonomics, customization, and just overall usability. I have to say that even though this camera is well known for bringing full frame goodness to a compact body unlike any we've seen before, also at a bargain price when you think about the performance you're getting here, one of the most impressive features, in my opinion, is really the actual engineering and design of the camera overall. Even though in previous updates I've shown how this is sort of a Frankenstein of the RX1 combined with the NEX 6 or 7, and then other nuance comes from basically other cameras in their lineup, really bringing together the best of everything Sony has to offer, which I still believe is true. You have to keep in mind that that doesn't necessarily equate to a great usable camera, and in my experience, it has here. So not only is this a marvel in terms of what it can accomplish from a still and video perspective, but you've also got a great camera to actually shoot with. The grip is fantastic. I'm going to focus on that right now. You can see we've got a lot more detail on this grip than any NEX camera that we've used in the past, and that speaks to really wanting to accommodate a pro who's going to be using this for a prolonged period of use. So you can see we've even got an inner grip or contour for your index fingers when holding the camera. This is something that I can assure you was not on previous generations of mirrorless cameras from Sony. I've got the 5R right here. You can see nothing like that going on. I mean, the grip is really minimal with the 5R, but even if I bring out something like the NEX 6, where you do have much of the grip that has inspired the one found here, still, again, you do not have that extra contour for comfort. So clearly a lot more in design spent, poured labor, general time invested in making the A7 not only something that breaks ground in terms of performance, but also, again, usability. Now, when I spoke about customization, this camera really has it all. I mean, when you want quick access to shutter speed, aperture, your ISO setting, of course, you've got your exposure compensation right here dedicated. It's all there, and that's because you've got a programmable finger button right here, which is pretty easy to access for those of you not accustomed to it, because quite frankly Sony's thinking a little bit outside of the box. Not to say that they're the first to do this, but you may not be accustomed to this if you're coming from another manufacturer, or even if you're coming from a Sony camera for that matter. They work really well, and they're very easy to get acclimated to. The thumb dial, certainly nothing new even for Sony. I mean, on the RX1 that I have right over here, you have that basically exact same design employed, clearly not as beefy, and that's because the RX1 is a pocket camera compared to the A7 and A7R. But really, they work well, solidly built. Construction here is great. Now, I mentioned the A7R, the more expensive model. It does have slightly superior construction, but that in no way, in my opinion, would affect anyone picking up the A7 in terms of them thinking for a moment that this is not a well-made camera. The A7R is just a little bit heavier, a little bit weightier, which results in maybe a lot of consumers, I think, thinking that they're getting more for their money. But that also kind of applies to the methodology of that bigger is better when it comes to cameras, and Sony has proven the exact opposite with this lineup. So great customization with those buttons. You've also got the actual literal custom buttons, C1 right there, and then we've got C2 here, and basically C3 down there. So a lot of customization capabilities. You've got your menu button right here, which has been another thing for me to get accustomed to. This is all part of the complete re-engineering, redesign of this camera. I just mentioned the C2 button there, your autofocus switch right there. Menu navigation is, the dial as it has been on pretty much every Sony camera in years past. Your function button, playback button, and then the C3 button, of course, really is the delete button. It doubles as your other customization button. Quick access to white balance, your actual continuous shooting mode, and timer. And then right here, we've got our bay for our memory card slot. And everything is weather sealed here. Another element that speaks to the professional or the professional-centric pitch that Sony's making with this Alpha top-tier line. The video record button right here, that pretty much, again, nothing new. Those of you who are NEX users are very familiar with that placement of a video record button. And that's been modified since the NEX7, which got a lot of flack for mispresses. So that's why the firmware even allowed for that feature to be turned off. In terms of the power button, pretty much exactly the same from the RX1. It works. Sony's using this in all of their cameras now that are high-end. The RX10 also has it, and I assume that the Alpha mirrorless APS-C cameras that we're going to see come out to replace the now dead NEX brand will also employ this sort of power button, as well as the shutter release button. Everything very much stemming from the success of the RX series in large part. Beyond that, we've got our multi-interface shoe, which does exactly what you would hope. It gives you the ability to expand your flexibility, whether we're talking about pro-grade flashes, microphones, XLR adapters like the one that Sony sells for around $800 US. Really anything you could want to do with this camera is facilitated with this multi-interface shoe, as long as you have the budget to support it. Third-party accessories aren't going to work as well, but with adapters, your mileage may vary. The viewfinder, best in the business, and this is one of the things I love. Part of the redesign, we now have it center-mounted where it should have always been from the beginning, and it really just is fantastic. OLED-based, they've even redesigned the actual sensor, and the sensor detects whether or not you are using the viewfinder or the screen. And now the sensor is center mounted rather than to the left, like you'll find on pretty much every Sony mirrorless camera, like the NEX6 right here. You can see it's side mounted. The same was true of the NEX7. So now we finally have, in my opinion, the correct engineering. I mean, this is where all of that thought comes into play. It's polish. And the grip is amazing. Again, it just takes the ergonomics of the NEX6 and 7 to a whole nother level, much like it does with its actual sensor. You do have hidden here Wi-Fi and NFC on board. Wi-Fi will allow you to utilize Sony's Play Memories application store, which I'll be showing a little bit later. A bevy of different apps available. This started out with the NEX5R, Sony's first mirrorless Wi-Fi enabled interchangeable lens camera based around, of course, an APS-C sensor. Now we've got it in a full frame capacity. So whether you want to control this camera remotely using your smartphone, iOS or Android, as well as tablets. And then if those phones, of course Apple does not, but if those Android phones or tablets have NFC, you can actually launch your smart remote control app just by touching the NFC contact points. And I've already done a demo video of that a while back. A useful feature, something that is far more than a gimmick. It's actually quite practical. And Sony incorporates this across their entire line of Wi-Fi and NFC-enabled cameras now. The smart remote control app has become standard fare. It's something Sony's known for, and it's a good thing to be known for because it is a really practical and very cool feature. It can be used for both still and video, but very limited when it comes to your actual controls of the actual settings on the camera. So don't expect to take full manual control of your camera. It's more of just for, framing that shot you couldn't necessarily do without having a remote. And in this case, you always have your phone or tablet, so that's what Sony's thinking with the Wi-Fi and NFC. But don't worry, if you don't have NFC, you're still fine with Wi-Fi. You'll just have to launch the app, pair it, and after that, it'll just be launching the app from your device of choice. This basically turns the camera into a hotspot. You do not need internet access. Don't confuse Wi-Fi with internet access. It's literally the wireless means of communication between the camera and your device of choice. So as long as your device has Wi-Fi, it can communicate with this camera, as long as you can run, again, the Play Memories application. You will need that to make that communication, that handshake, occur. NFC is just a shortcut to basically making the process more seamless and not having to go in and turn on Wi-Fi, because at least most of us, myself included, do not have Wi-Fi on all the time. Beyond that, I mentioned weather sealing, which is just a critical upgrade for the mirrorless lineup. But then on the left side of the camera, that's where we have all of our ports. The doors, I can say, I feel like could have been made much better. They're plastic, they feel flimsy, but if that's my biggest gripe of the A7, it's certainly very easy to live with, in my opinion, again, considering what a value this camera is. And I'll be talking about that a little bit later in comparison to competing products. You have your dedicated microphone jack right there. It's just a 3.5 millimeter jack, as well as a headphone jack for monitoring audio. And that's because Sony realizes that this really can be used as a legitimate video camera. It does have limitations when it comes to the 29-minute clip recording constraints or restraints, but in terms of quality, as long as we're not talking 4K, this is going to produce some of the finest video in the market. Not the best, but some of the best. And that's why Sony recognizes that pros are going to want to be able to utilize that, whether it's through the multi-interface shoe and everything they can utilize there, external monitors and all the other things I've mentioned already. But then here we also have raw HDMI output. Sony markets the 4K output, which is certainly great if you have a 4K display, but for most of the public, it's really not an important feature, maybe a little bit of future-proofing, but it does look stunning. I can assure you of that, because after all, you have images to match. Finally, a image and display that really can play nicely together. For pros, on the other hand, the raw HDMI output is going to allow them to capture video and then grade it to their liking, something that, again, you wouldn't be able to do traditionally with any mirrorless cameras for the most part, let alone a full-frame one, because they don't exist outside of Leica. So that's another important thing to point out. You've got your multi-port there, which is really just a micro USB port, but Sony's branded it that way because they do have accessories now, such as remote controls, things of that nature, that work with the multi-port. That's why it has the multi name. It's not just for charging. You will have to charge your battery in the body, something that I know a lot of you aren't fond of, but again, if that's the big compromise, it's really not a compromise at all. The W series is the same battery that Sony's been using with their NEX cameras and will continue to use, I guess, foreseeably for the future, since that is what was used for this brand new flagship camera. I think that if they were going to bring out a new battery, we would have seen it. It has softened in price, but it's not the best performer. You're not going to be able to pull off digital SLR battery life with a camera like this, even though it does give you results that will blow away most, and I won't say most, but many full-frame competing products. Battery life, somewhere a little over 200 shots, 250. You're not going to get 300 shots out of this. So that's a little bit disappointing. But again, I've got to give the good and the bad here, clearly. And that's really not bad. It's just a limitation of this body size. You have to remember we're working with something that's a fraction of the size of a traditional full-frame camera. So, specifications to match the tool, despite the fact that we've got this gigantic sensor. It's not shocking that battery life is not insane. You've got that sensor right there. Again, this is something back from the Konica Minolta days, the acquisition. Sony's been using it for a long time to basically detect whether or not you're gripping the camera and pre-focus. They've also got an eye focus feature. I'll get into that as we go through the menus. But overall, just an incredible camera top to bottom. I can tell you that right now. And the price really is a bonus. And that's because it's only going to get less expensive. And right now, you can't come anywhere near this sort of quality and versatility at this price, let alone $1,000 more, really. The actual mode dial is exactly what you would expect. And again, feels solid and just works nicely. You have presets for your own configurations there. And really, this is a customizable camera to the nth degree, a dream when it comes to that. In terms of glass, I mentioned we're working with E-mount, which is a good and bad thing. Bad because the FE mount is in its infancy, much like the A7 and A7R. I mentioned the kit lens, and now I will come back to it. So if you really don't want to spend any more money on glass, the kit lens is a good option. It's not inexpensive. On its own, it's $500. With the kit, you're getting a break on it because you're getting it all together for $1999.99, and the camera, as I mentioned before, the body only goes for $1,700. But in terms of performance, indoors, this is really not going to do anything impressive. You're looking at a lens like any kit lens that's really just optimized to give you something to shoot with, not something to wow you. With that said, this lens will still wow you in outdoor and proper, I should say, lighting conditions, and that's because Sony tends to give some very good kit. Not to be cute, it's true. If you've used E-mount lenses, then you know that their kit lenses were some of the best in the business and really did exceed expectations. In fact, arguably made many people question whether or not the higher-end glass was warranted unless it actually was going to best the aperture rating. So that's where I come to the aperture rating, and that's why this lens simply isn't going to fare well in low light. You see it right there. That's what your expectations legitimately should be. So this is not a low light lens like any other kit lens. I don't know why people expect it or criticize it for such reasons, because it's simply absurd. In terms of range, you get a nice solid range there. I mean, 28 to 70 is exactly what I would expect on a kit lens. It's slightly larger, no question, than what you'd get with other mirrorless options, and that's because, well, it's full frame, folks, and part of the compromise here with full frame is that you're going to have to take on much larger lenses. The only other lenses that came out with this camera at launch, Zeiss 35mm f2.8, which I don't have here, which is a small lens, but keep in mind, it is a 35mm. That's why. It's a fixed lens, no zoom capability. I'm throwing on one of my native E-mount lenses here. I did a video on this the other day. This is my SEL 10 to 18. It does have optical steady shot, and believe it or not, does work in full frame mode. I don't have to crop here, and I'll get to that also a little bit later, which is very cool. One of the interesting things about using SEL glass rather than FE glass, and the fact that, of course, it is compatible here. A-mount glass, not compatible. You will need to pick up one of Sony's optional accessory adapters, which are pretty cool too, because they do bring faster autofocusing than what we get natively with the A7 or A7R, of course. But again, as far as kit lenses go, it's solid, but in my opinion, if you're buying the A7 or A7R, you really shouldn't even bother with the kit lens. I mean, you're buying a full frame, arguably professional, at the very least semi-professional camera, and if that's where your aspirations lie, you should get glass to match. And that's not to say that this kit lens isn't very solid. It is. In fact, many will argue it's the best option right now, because the Zeiss glass that I mentioned, the 35mm, is priced at $799.99, And then if you want the 50 millimeter f1.8 prime lens, you're looking at $1,000. If you want to step up to the zoom lens, which is about to launch, which is my personal favorite pick because it really is the replacement for this kit lens. It's about the same size, better construction, and certainly better optics, or at least that's what's hoped, because it's got a constant f4 aperture across its range. That lens is $1,200. So this is a system in its infancy that's also extremely pricey and very limited, at least when it comes to native FE lenses. There's also a G series 70 to 200 millimeter zoom lens that's going to be very pricey and also hasn't been released yet. That Zeiss zoom lens, the f4 constant, is going to launch at the beginning of February, so that's right around the corner. So it really depends what you need. A lot of people that complain about the lack of lenses, I really don't have sympathy for, and I'll explain why. Show me another company that's actually innovating the way Sony is, actually rolling the dice, putting everything on the line to not just give us a new product, but change the way we use our photographic tools. And really no one else is doing it. So the fact that we've got to wait a little bit for their roadmap of lenses to develop, I don't have a problem with. And if you're a pro, you definitely don't have a problem, because as you already know from using NEX cameras, they are phenomenal when adapted with legacy glass. Adapters are incredibly cheap to purchase. I don't have any here or legacy glass to demo it with for all of you. But for those of you interested, you already know that if you are willing to deal with manual focus, which with peaking on here is incredibly easy, they also have the magnified option to really see exactly what you're pinpoint focusing on, then any piece of glass, young or old, is going to do well, and that's manufacturer aside. In fact, some of the best results are coming from that legacy glass that people are going out and shooting manual with. So that's where I think pros are going to love the A7 and A7R. They couldn't necessarily love the other mirrorless options, the NEX, because they were based around APS-C, and they really required full frame for their work, for professional purposes. Now they have that capability. So the compromise before is now gone when it comes to the actual sensor size, and I think that's a big step in making what was very flexible in the NEX lineup in terms of uncompromised, or not uncompromised, but uncontested image quality at its price point. Well, now we've got a professional alternative, or at least less of a reason for pros to say, it's not just that it's not a big enough body, it's literally that I don't have enough photographic detail and image quality. Now they've got it, especially with the A7R. Now, in terms of the lens we're looking at here, I mentioned that some SEL lenses, existing E-mount lenses, play well, others do not. This wide-angle SEL 10 to 18 actually is full frame, believe it or not, through, I believe, it's roughly about 14 to 18 millimeters. So I'm going to show you that right now. And yes, this is the first time the camera's powering on, believe it or not. And even though we've just got white table here, what you're going to notice is if I go all the way out wide, or actually right now we are in the crop mode because I was using my SEL 18 to 200 power zoom recently. And I'm going to take you into the settings. This door is hanging open here. And that's another issue, if they don't pop in, you will have that problem. And I'm going to go through all the menus, but I just want to show you this about the lens. If we go to the actual lens settings here, which I may have just passed through, hold on a second, because you have to actually go to the crop mode. I may have missed it. And essentially the camera will ask you, I have to go to settings here. The camera will ask you if you want to use the camera in crop mode, meaning when an SEL lens goes on, you need to accommodate the fact that it is designed for an APS-C sensor, not a full frame sensor. So that's why the camera will instantly tell you, do you plan to work in the confines of the APS-C lens, or do you want to basically just shoot raw the way you would normally, full frame? I'm looking for the setting now, and I don't know why I'm missing it. There it is. So you can see the APS-C size capture right there, and I have it on. If I turn it to off, we're now in traditional full frame. and the camera is going to treat the lens as it would as if it were the FE native lens or another full frame lens that we had adapted, again, using an adapter. So right now you can see at 10 millimeters that we can't get the entire 10 millimeter frame. So 10 millimeter, not usable. But as I take it in, and right now we're at, let's check exactly what we're at. I believe we're actually at 12. So you could argue that starting at 12 millimeters, we're completely usable in full frame. And this is pretty incredible because this was not something I expected. And this lens also has optical steady shot, something I lacked or forgot to mention when going through the glass lineup for this camera. The only lens, FE native lens with optical steady shot, will be the Zeiss zoom lens that I mentioned that will be an f4 constant lens, $1,200. So very cool that this lens actually does work in full frame as a true wide angle full frame lens from 12 all the way to 18. We can't get that 10, as you can see right there, but overall, just I didn't expect this, and that's why I already did a video about this lens and the way it performs. So that's something to note about SEL glass and the way it works with the A7. So no compromise on the megapixels there. Now, if I scaled it to APS-C, we'd be looking at 10 megapixel stills here because that's what the A7 yields in the APS-C crop factor. If it was the A7R, because the R has 36 megapixels, we'd be getting a 16 megapixel equivalent, for those of you curious about how SEL lenses actually behave on the A7 or R. So that's the highest quality you're going to get, and you could definitely argue it will outperform if the SEL lens was on an NEX 6, 7, or even possibly whatever comes out down the road to succeed those cameras, because after all, we are working with, at least at its base, a much higher quality and larger sensor than what you're dealing with APS-C. So pleasantly surprised by the performance with this lens, really happy, and didn't expect it. I really thought that all of the SEL lenses were going to have to go if I was going to migrate to the A7. So this is good to know. Now, the power zoom, on the other hand, is a different story altogether. If I use this lens, which I'm going to show you right now, essentially you lose, basically you're stuck in the crop mode. You do not have this great surprise benefit that I got with the SEL 10 to 18, and I'll show you that right now. And this is a fantastic lens for NEX cameras, anything E-mount that's APS-C. You've got 18 to 200 millimeters of range, but a power zoom that you can go between manual and, of course, servo, and control the speed, and really it just delivers almost professional quality results. In fact, that's what it was designed to do. So let me mount it on the camera. And if you didn't notice, by the way, the SEL 10 to 18 lens really is just a beautiful match for the A7. This is more of a clear representation of where we're going once full-frame lenses continue to get mounted on this camera. I mean, I can only imagine what an FE 18 to 200 lens would look like. Of course, this is only an E-mount lens, so it is cropped. So let me go ahead and power the camera up, and I'm going to show you the exact same thing that I just did. We're going to go ahead and go into well, I don't need to. I have crop mode off. So you can see already that everything in the range is basically unusable. And that's unfortunate. I mean, we get the center, but that's literally, it's still essentially a crop through the entire 18 to 200 range, even when we aren't in crop mode. But if I go ahead and jump into the menu and turn that back on, you can leave it on auto also. That's another good way. It'll just auto detect whether you're using an SEL or FE lens, which is probably the best way to go. Now we're stuck at 10 megapixels, as you can see. Extra fine JPEG. So this would be 16 megapixels if I was working with the A7R. Of course, the SEL lenses like this one do benefit from stabilization. That's another good thing because, as I've mentioned, this body doesn't have it, nor do any of the other NEX, mirrorless Sony cameras, for those of you unfamiliar. So this isn't something new, it's standard. I have to say this lens looks really good on here, far more balanced than it did on something like the NEX6 or the NEX5R, 5T, or the NEX7, but still far from an ideal fit. It can't really, it leans back, and that's because of this hump for the motor. But this is a great lens. I mean, I really do love this lens, and I'm having a lot of trouble deciding whether or not to part with it, with taking on the A7 or A7R into the arsenal. So again, this is one of those examples of a less than ideal matching of SEL glass with the brand new FE really optimized full frame system, even though it is, again, all based around E-mount. Because basically all they've done is much of what they did here is that on all these new full frame lenses, they've got a narrow neck to connect a giant full frame lens. And that's what was going on here, but that's because we had an 18-200 lens in this body, in this shell. So that's why it was so large, and then a motor to boot. So less than optimal performance with the SEL power zoom 18-200, which was disappointing for me. But again, if you're buying this for full frame, you really shouldn't be buying it to complain or brag about performance with your SEL lenses. In fact, I assume a lot of you probably will be abandoning your SEL lenses if you're migrating to this full frame system. But then again, I have to say that if you have SEL lenses, why are you actually moving? Do you need the extra resolution? The video quality, sure, it's better, but do you need that as well? Do you need all of the manual controls here? I'm not sure of that, and that's something you have to decide as a consumer. Along top, we have the two microphone arrays, or rather the microphone array, and it's really good. I mean, better than any NEX camera, better than any mirrorless camera Sony's introduced. Audio levels are here, and I think without further ado, it's time to jump into the menu and really dive. So let's do it. I'm going to detach the lens because, quite frankly, I do not need the extra heft of the power zoom 18-200, and I'll throw the SEL 10-18 back on there so that you can still see. So I still have a lens actually on board, but ergonomically speaking, far more palatable to use something like this, and it definitely is closer to the experience you'd get, let's say, with the 35mm. So as you may have noticed, anytime the sensor gets blocked, it thinks it's using the electronic viewfinder, that OLED viewfinder, and that's exactly how it should work. And it works well, better than the side-mounted, as I mentioned before. In terms of something to focus on, go ahead and bring that out, even though we're not really going to be doing too much focusing here. Now we are in crop mode. You can see that indication right there, and that's because I left it on auto. So now this is one of those instances where had I not experimented and left it on full, I would have never even known, and I would have stuck with the 10 megapixel letdown in many ways. But you can see you've got all this on-screen information. You can control that with the display button. Pretty much self-explanatory. This is not new stuff. But one area beyond the ergonomics, beyond the sensor, the redesign of the whole body, and just the overall quality that this camera produces that Sony knew they had to upgrade for pros, and that includes the weather sealing, was the software. I mean, NEX cameras were amazing in terms of what they were able to output, but their software was far from it. And I really couldn't complain about it because, again, nothing like it on the market. Now we've got menus that look just like they should. Professional style menus, the type you'll find from all of Sony's competitors, and in Sony's case, now across all of their cameras. This started with the RX100, the Mark II, the RX1, the RX1R, the RX10, and now we're seeing it here in their mirrorless full frame offerings. This is not new, of course, to the Alpha line, but all of the other Sony cameras I just mentioned had point-and-shoot menus that really left a lot of people walking away from the cameras rather than enjoying them. So let's start off at the beginning, take you through the menus. I'm not going to put you to sleep with this, hopefully. In terms of image size, because we are using this right now, the SEL lens, we are stuck with the 10 megapixel as our highest setting. So let me go ahead and actually switch back, get us out of the crop mode, because as long as we're in the crop mode, you're going to see limitations. I really don't want you to. So now we got that off. Let's go ahead and go back. Overshot it there. So image size now 24 megapixels. You can take it down to medium at 10, small at 6. So fairly simple there. And the menu button, I have to say, in terms of going back, is one thing I had to get used to. Traditionally, the back buttons were located here, thumb reach, not your left thumb. So you really have to two-hand this camera in a way that you didn't previous mirrorless cameras from Sony. But that's just something I wanted to point out, something I noticed through the course of my use. The aspect ratio, 3:2, 16:9. Also want to point out that the actual display is different. We've moved to that 4:3 ratio from, or 3:2 rather, from the wider screen found on the NEX lineup of cameras. And again, that speaks to that we're dealing with a full frame sensor. They wanted a screen to match. The screen quality, by the way, very good, 921K. It's just as sharp as could be, very bright. I like it. You have that articulation, which, I wish we could, bring it around, flip it to the side, but for whatever reason, that's how limited it is. But it works well and will prevent you from having neck problems in certain circumstances. Quality, you've got the traditional options. You can go just straight RAW and JPEG. Keep in mind that if you go that way, you will not get the extra fine. You will get a RAW plus a fine JPEG. And that's something Sony does across the board. And of course, you could then go with standard. I can tell you the out-of-camera JPEG extra fine images are amazing, but if you don't plan on using RAW, I don't know why you're buying a camera that's full frame. That really sums things up. You should probably be looking at something like the RX10, RX100, or RX100 Mark II, even though those may not sound similar in terms of the actual camera that we're looking at here. It speaks to what consumers actually need as opposed to what they've been convinced they need. And even though all of those cameras have RAW capability, you're likely shooting in JPEG, I would imagine, if you're using them. And that's not to stereotype all users. It's just a matter of fact and common sense and overall logic. But moving back again, there I go again with having to remember to go back to that menu button. Your panorama size and direction, of course, if I was in the panorama mode, we'd be able to manipulate that. Your file format for AVC HD, you can see basically you can switch between that and MP4. AVC HD is still the highest mode here. Wish that we would have gotten 4K capability with this camera, but unfortunately that's something I anticipate will be in the second generation A7 and A7R. In terms of the actual quality, the usual suspect, 60i 24 megabits per second, 60i 17, 60p 28, which is what I always go with because I'd always rather have more and then compress if I need to rather than have to try to, or wish that I had more quality when I don't. 24p, of course, and then finally a 17 megabit 24p. So these are really the best settings to go with, PS and FX. Still shooting in terms of drive mode, again, self-explanatory. Your bracketing, get 3, basically, which is pretty strong. I think that's perfectly fine. It works well and pretty much ensures that you're going to end up with the desired effect. And that's something that if it wasn't there, clearly everyone would say, how on earth is that missing? But, Sony really has made sure to accommodate everything you need. Flash mode, of course, you can just shut it off, go with auto, fill, slow, rear. It's all there. Flash composure, or compensation, excuse me. I'm losing it slightly at this point, 39 minutes in. That is not available simply because it's not available in auto. Red eye reduction, again, self-explanatory. Generally, I do leave that off, even though it does a pretty good job. The focus mode, this is a great thing. You can go with single shot, autofocus, continuous, and again, whatever you want to do, the option is there. Your focus area. This is another great feature, not available in auto. Let's go back to it right now. You can see we control basically whether we want to go wide, zoned, center, or of course the flexible spot. So great features to have, but again, you expect these things. The focus settings also there. Your autofocus illuminator, I tend to keep that off because people tend to get disturbed by that light coming up and not blinding them, but at least obscuring their vision. Exposure compensation, well, we know we have a dial here, but that's not being used right now in programmable mode. Exposure step, another good control to have. Your ISO settings, of course, you can go auto and then customize whatever dial, finger, thumb, C button, whatever you want to control, or get quick access to your ISO settings. And low light is one of the areas, like all of Sony's mirrorless cameras, that this, as well as the A7R, just do a brilliant job. That's something that is part of the lineage of Sony's mirrorless business, so no surprise that that comes through here. Metering mode, your white balance, even underwater auto. But that's got to be there for a professional grade camera. Your HDR, now they do have the dynamic range optimizer on auto. You can leave that on. Some people won't like it because they'll feel it just is over saturating things and blowing things out. I personally think it's fine to leave the HDR on auto if you aren't a pro. If you're a pro, you aren't going to want to leave this on, clearly. But dynamic range is what the full frame sensor is all about, and giving you leverage that you wouldn't get otherwise in that department. Also, of course, your depth of field. These are all things that make a 35mm full frame equivalent a must-have for pros. Amateurs and enthusiasts, it's a tougher argument to make, and that's why I continue to say if you enjoy your mirrorless experience in the APS-C class, you don't need to migrate to something like this. Creative style, this is nothing new again with Sony cameras. A bevy of modes. Your picture effect, again, nothing new to Sony. A laundry list. Some people love those, some people obviously can do without them easily. Noise reduction, this is really going to be best for if you're dealing with JPEGs. If you're shooting RAW, you're not going to want to keep that on. High ISO noise reduction, same story essentially. Lock-on autofocus, the smile and face detection is a great feature Sony's had for a long time, and I highly recommend using it. If you haven't, trust me, you will enjoy it. Soft skin effect, not something I use too much because that's really more about post. And as you notice, a lot of these features are obviously geared towards people who are going to be shooting JPEG. In terms of object framing, you've got auto as well as off. Definitely keep that to off, in my opinion, and experience. Steady shot, on and off, always going to be on unless you're trying to get the most quality possible. Then you do, if you're on a tripod, turn it off. Well, why would you have it on if you're on a tripod? It's really geared towards handheld shooting, obviously. The color space, I'm not going to really get into too much. Stick with sRGB. Adobe isn't widely supported yet, even though it is, in my opinion, the superior route to go. Google Plus does support it. I love Google Plus, especially if you're a photographer. You already know why. There are so many good reasons to like Google Plus. Forget the fact that your photos are still your photos. But that aside, moving right along, final page here under the camera settings, auto slow shutter, your audio recording, your levels, which can be adjusted in the event that they need to be, something again that just speaks to the the professional nature of this camera when compared to previous mirrorless offerings from Sony. Your audio out timing, wind noise reduction, memory, and that's pretty much it. In terms of actual settings, Zebra, very effective, and glad to see it here. Manual focus assist. You've also got focus magnification time, the amount of time it'll literally magnify the area that you're trying to pinpoint for your manual focus to hit. Grid line, your audio level display, the auto review feature, display button, self-explanatory, peaking level, your peaking color, because of course you can select from red, yellow, or white. Exposure set guide, your live view display, phase detect area, and that's because I didn't mention it, and I did briefly mention it. This camera has both phase and contrast autofocus. The A7R only has contrast-based autofocus, so you do have that phase detect area on the sensor. If you want to have it turned on, it does obscure what you see, but it is effective in terms of acquiring a faster autofocus than contrast on its own. The pre-autofocus is a great feature if you don't mind the battery life that it eats, and essentially it's going to always find autofocus actively without you ever having to touch the shutter button. And I believe I just had it set to on, correct? So basically you can see right now it's just going to autofocus. I'm trying to give you the best example. Instantly, it just knows to do that. So it doesn't require a press. So it is a battery eater, no question, but still something I think a lot of you will enjoy using. Zoom setting, of course, optical only, or you can beef it up with clear image zoom and even digital zoom as well. And that's something where, again, I had high hopes for my SEL 18-200 lens, but unless I'm doing something wrong, those expectations, unfortunately, thus far haven't been met. The iStart autofocus not enabled here. It's another cool feature, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Finder, monitor, basically what you've been noticing with it trying to detect whether I'm using the viewfinder or the screen. Release without lens is how you're going to be able to use this camera and any other Sony mirrorless camera with legacy glass with an adapter. Basically, it allows the camera to stay on while it essentially has no glass mounted on it and still take the shot, and the rest is up to you, aka the manual focus and composing your actual photograph. Autofocus with shutter. The front curtain, this is another thing I'll be getting to in a moment, because the front curtain is actually non-existent on the A7R. Some people very unhappy with that, and that's because it's something where here you have the ability to shut it on or off. It really equates mostly to the speed of the shot and the actual shutter noise itself. So as far as I'm concerned, I really don't care. This isn't a big issue for me. And if I own the A7R eventually, shutter noise is the last thing that I am concerned with. But it is, again, all about the physical process of the shot being taken. I'm not getting into that right now. But you have the ability to turn it on or off here. In terms of the actual exposure compensation set, again, you can modify that from ambient and flash to ambient only. Reset your EV compensation and bracket order. Face recognition, the APS-C size capture I already went over. Autofocus micro adjust and lens compensation. Because actually, clearly Sony realizes this can adapt and adopt so many lenses. There's got to be some lens compensation in there. The function menu set, custom key settings. This is how you're going to customize all of those buttons. And you can see right here, go for it. Custom key settings, same idea. Your dial setup, same thing again. So really, as customizable as you could possibly want. Do you want to turn the movie button off? You can do that. Do you want to unlock or lock the dial wheel. All the options are here. Now we get to applications. You can send your photos to the smartphone in 1-for-1 quality or reduced size. That's something I showed in the actual demo of the Wi-Fi capability. You can send to a computer as well. You will need to install Sony's Play Memories software there and actually hook it up with USB that first time. After that, you will be able to send photos to the computer wirelessly to your heart's content. But you will have to do that with every PC you plan to use Wi-Fi with. So it's definitely easier to use this with an Android or iOS device than it is a PC. More convenient, I should say, since you don't actually ever have to do a physical wired hookup to begin with to mate them. Viewing on TV, self-explanatory. One-touch NFC, also self-explanatory. But for those of you unfamiliar, again, near-field communication is going to allow you to basically just touch your smartphone or tablet to the NFC logo right here and then activate your Play Memories application, the Smart Remote Control app. Airplane mode. In the event, you want to make sure that Wi-Fi and NFC do not drain any battery whatsoever because you have no interest in having those on or them accidentally getting activated by making contact with an NFC enabled device. You can go ahead and shut that off. And also, if you're actually on an airplane, that is another reason. The WPS push. Your access point settings. Remember, this camera is a hotspot. Like all of Sony's Wi-Fi enabled cameras, it is its own hotspot that is going to basically act as an access point for your smartphone or tablet to communicate with, and use the hotspot here as the actual network that it works over. It is a direct Wi-Fi communication process there. You can edit the device name, display your MAC address, SSID, password reset, reset the network settings. Finally, the application list. And this is something I've shown off. It's something that since it was first launched, I was very excited about. You can see Sony has the Smart Remote Control listed there, application management, and then the actual App Store itself. We're using my home network here to get access to it. Relatively quick, the Wi-Fi chipset here. You know, nothing blazing, but considering this is a full-frame camera, I have not been disappointed. Keep in mind, we are nowhere near my actual router. So you log in, you can see the actual bar for load time there, progress. Currently, they've got a new tab. It shows that multiple exposure app is available. You've also got a lens compensation app available to go above and beyond the actual lens compensation that I showed you built into this camera out of the box. Time-lapse, my personal favorite app available because just great to have that in a seamless integrated application. All of the available apps you're about to see right now. And the list has grown. I mean, when this camera launched, all we had were, I think, 3 or 4 apps. The important one was the Smart Remote Control. Now we've got, you know, not all of the apps available to the NEX lineup, but we're getting close. So whether you're looking for direct upload, Flickr, photo retouching, picture effects, the Smart Remote Control, there's just a lot of stuff, and you can expect everything that's pre-existing or already out there for the NEX, the APS-C alpha cameras, I'll call them. I have to get used to that. Then that will eventually make its way here. In fact, this may usher in even more development since this is going to bring a lot of customers over that are Canon and Nikon loyalists, in my opinion. Finally, My Apps, which once you've logged into your Sony Play Memories account here on the camera, that's another step you'll have to do one time. And after that, you will have access to all of your apps. So if you're coming from an NEX camera, once you log in, all of the apps you've already purchased will populate right there in your apps. And then they've got the actual settings for the application store, which is exactly to sign in, as I mentioned before. Going back, they've also got the introduction to the store, which I'm not going to do. Now, in terms of playback, self-explanatory stuff, display rotation, enlarging the image, 4K still playback, protecting your images, specify your printing, and then finally we're in the actual settings of the camera. So I'll bring that up close and let's begin. So you've got your monitor brightness, your viewfinder brightness, your color temperature control, audio signals, title menu, your mode dial, you can your delete confirm, I mean, everything just detail and customization out the wazoo. Your display quality, power save start time, cleaning mode. I'm not sure exactly how this works in comparison to the NEX cameras, because I haven't actually felt the vibration that you would traditionally get. So it's not exactly the same. That much I can say. Demo mode, self-explanatory. Remote control, HDMI resolution. You've also got control for HDMI, your HDMI info display, whether or not you want it overlaid for the HDMI raw output, USB connection. I mean, everything's self-explanatory here. Your version, of course, for firmware. And that's something you'll actively have to update as Sony updates firmware, even though they don't do a lot, as well as their lens firmware. And that's often to accommodate new lenses as they change their autofocusing systems and camera systems altogether. But that pretty much is the run through on the menu. Autofocus with this camera, again, very fast, but this isn't a sports camera. This is not meant for wildlife. This is more of a landscape portrait machine. You're looking at a camera that gets 5 frames per second continuous, so as far from a speed demon as it could possibly be. It's APS-C counterparts, the NEX cameras, all pretty much 10 frames per second, but they don't have full frame 24 megapixel sensors or 36 full frame megapixel sensors like the one found in the A7R. So a lot to like here. Incredible low light performance, best in class electronic viewfinder, all of the ergonomics completely reworked, redesigned. Audio quality fantastic for a camera of this class, form factor. The menu system is great. All of these customizable buttons and dials pretty much make it so that the pro and enthusiast alike has instant access to everything they could need. As I mentioned, ISO, shutter, aperture, everything is there. Your exposure compensation, traditional mode dial, and everything feels pro. I mean, having pro performance and not having the body to match was a problem that Sony encountered firsthand with their NEX lineup. And I don't mean that they literally delivered pro performance, but I think you understand what I mean. They delivered quality far beyond what anyone expected from a camera that looked like this and had such a compact form factor and point and shoot-esque software. And that is part of the stigma that the A7 and A7R are out to break, not only from a technical standpoint, but also ergonomic and actual professional feel, build quality, just the full list. Every possible thing you could want is here. And that's what the A7 delivers on, and in a very affordable fashion. And that's something I want to talk about as well. The A7 at $1,700 for body alone is literally not exactly $1,000 less than anything it competes with, but close. And the fact that it can adapt so many different lenses and really be turned into a complete rig. No overheating problems, by the way, another thing that NEX cameras suffered from in the past, mirrorless cameras. The overheating days are over, at least for when it comes to the A7 and A7R. So even though you're limited to 29-minute video clips, you're not going to have a problem where the camera's going to shut down on you and you're going to have to worry, are you ruining the heatsink? Are you ruining the camera? And I do like that they have moved the memory bay here. That's something where it always should have been there, frankly. Do I wish they had gone with a new battery type? Yeah, even if it would have been a little bit more expensive, had it actually yielded better battery life, it would have been in Sony's favor. But keep in mind, this is a first generation camera. I expect that the second gen is where it's going to really be at. And that's not to say that this isn't groundbreaking. As I said before, this is the future of digital imaging, in my opinion. This makes every other manufacturer look like they are sitting on their hands. But with that said, the lack of native glass, the lack of 4K video, which I know it's asking a lot, but I would have been willing to spend literally $1,000 more on this camera, or at the very least $500 more, to get 4K video output. And it seems like it's all just a matter of software, because we clearly have more than enough resolution here to achieve 4K. And I understand Sony doesn't want to cannibalize their business. That makes a lot of sense. But nonetheless, it is something that I wish was here. And I'm not saying it's going to make me necessarily wait for the next generation of this camera, but it's something I want to share with all of you because this is a first-gen camera. And even though it's been getting incredible praise that is warranted, it still is missing some things that I really wish were there. And that begins with that 4K support. I will be the first to admit, though, that since 4K is still a few years away from really being household in a broad manner, it's understandable why Sony didn't bother with trying to get 4K in here, especially since they just introduced their first consumer-friendly, at least when it comes to price and form factor, 4K camcorder, which will launch in March. So a lot to like here. Incredible still performance that is going to make any full-frame digital SLR, or should give any full-frame digital SLR, a run for its money in a form factor that's a fraction of the size. Unfortunately, as we see more FE, full-frame E-mount lenses come to market, I'm afraid that they are going to slightly undo the entire novelty of this incredibly small form factor. And that we can already see with this kit lens, because this kit lens is considerably smaller than the 18 to 200 millimeter, but not that much smaller. And considering this is a power zoom lens to boot, that's a little bit scary. So when you start to think about how large lenses are going to be on here, and if you thought things got the balance on NEX cameras was poor with larger glass like this, imagine what it's going to be like with larger full frame lenses. So it's another thing to take into account if you're considering moving from any mirrorless camera that isn't full frame to something like this that generally benefits from not only a smaller form factor but smaller lenses to match. And again, I keep coming back to this pairing because it just looks great. It fits the camera perfectly and even works as a full frame lens. And this makes me want the A7 and A7R even more. But I'm constantly reminded by the fact that this is a first-gen camera. Even though it is the culmination of Sony's mirrorless business, there is still more to be done with this. Like any product, it's far from perfect. Video quality is stellar, but you're still going to find artifacts and things that, quite frankly, shouldn't be here in 2014. And I am being critical, but that's because it's warranted. Sony has not upped the megabit rate for compression in AVC HD, at least in cameras like this and other high-end cameras, for many years now. And even though they're finally starting to do it, which I applaud, I really think it should have started here in the A7 and A7R. Again, I think it's a matter of cannibalism, cannibalizing their own businesses, but there's probably a lot more at play there, and I'm not trying to get into Sony's marketing and their entire business model. They've got enough going on with this transition back to only having Alpha and CyberShot, Alpha and RX being, Alpha and CyberShot being the two brands, so that customers are aware one is meant to be consumer friendly, the other is meant to be enthusiast to professional friendly. And finally, the one thing I want to close on here with this entire review is that the A7 is a winner. Don't for a moment doubt that. But when people continuously ask me, should I be going with, something that's just the regular Micro Four Thirds or APS-C, I'm constantly going to tell them, you have to understand or recognize what your actual needs are. And even though the A7 and A7R are groundbreaking cameras that may seem expensive, but realistically are bargains for what they deliver, it still is not the camera that's right for everyone. And even though you might be expecting that NEX7, the A7000 speculated successor, to be close to the A7 in price, I really doubt that it's going to get that close. Probably within $300 to $500, and I think Sony has started a trend here where $500 seems to be the price difference between, stepping up. Just like with their new camcorder line, the FDR AX100 is $500 more than the 1080p identical version of that camera that they're also launching, which has the same bit rate, same everything, but just doesn't give you the software to actually have 4K capability. So I won't call this built-in obsolescence. It's not, but it's Sony, acknowledging they're a business. They need to make money. They have margins, and they need to have a reason to make you upgrade, frankly, which I'm not a big fan of. No one is as a consumer. But again, I appreciate and put the innovation that Sony brings to the table in front of any of the negative stuff that I've brought up through the course of this review. If battery life is an issue, you can pick up the vertical grip. It's $300. It's going to give you 2 batteries. It'll charge, one, then discharge one, and then the next one. Essentially, it's not going to do like a simultaneous. And it works well, looks great on the camera. But again, we're moving away, or at least defeating the purpose in large part of the form factor that mirrorless brings to us. But many pros will still argue that even if with a vertical grip, this camera or the A7R ends up being just half the size, or I think half the size is accurate, of their traditional full frame shooter, that already is well worth the switch over. And I understand why, because weight is weight, we're human, and why, test our bodies if we don't have to? And in the past, we really did have to. I mean, the first camera to really change it all, again, from Sony, which is still one of my favorites, if not my favorite on the market, is the RX1. And that's because it delivered the exact same 24 megapixel full frame sensor we're getting here with an incredible f2 Zeiss lens built into it, a 35 millimeter lens that isn't matched right now for the FE lineup and foreseeably won't be in the future, and built that into an incredible camera that was basically paired with the sensor, built for one another, optimized, included everything you could possibly want traditionally from a pro standpoint, except for a viewfinder, really. No articulating screen. You do have that multi-interface shoe, though, to let you have a whole bevy of other accessories. A flash, which no flash here, but again, if you're a pro, Sony expects you to attach a flash. That's why you have the multi-interface shoe. But for someone who doesn't want to buy glass, for someone who wants the best pocket camera ever made, that is this. I mean, the RX100, that's really the best pocket camera ever made because it's for the masses. It doesn't cost $2,800 like this RX1. But when it comes to the best image quality in the smallest form factor ever made, you're looking at it here. And I mean, just put it side by side. Even if the A7 right now had the Zeiss f2.8 35 millimeter lens on it, the RX1 would still be tiny when compared to it. Granted, it doesn't have the ergonomic advantages. I mean, the grip here is awful compared to the grip on the A7, but that's because the A7 is ready to take on lenses that weigh pounds. The RX1 is done. This is a fixed lens, finished package. No more accessories are needed unless you want them. And that means, the lens hood, the case, electronic viewfinder. The point is, this is it. And it actually can get into a pocket. But clearly, when it comes to versatility, video capability, and what you can do with the RX1, it pales in comparison to what the A7 finally delivers. And that's what makes the A7 so unique. We finally have full frame in mirrorless form factor, and really, you should have realized through the course of this hour-plus review, extraordinarily little compromise. The biggest compromise really comes in the form of battery life, in my opinion. And considering batteries are inexpensive and very easy to pop in, and now we even have a vertical grip, something that was vacant from the NEX lineup, another clear indication that this is the maturation development of a professional mirrorless Sony camera, besides the fact that it sports a full-frame sensor, which is what pros require. Everything is there to make this the best photographic tool, in my opinion, on the market right now for someone who requires an interchangeable lens system. And that, I don't care who you're loyal to, the fact that you can bring any lens, any glass system to this camera with an adapter, and the focus peaking is so good, and that's something that predates this camera with Sony, really makes this the best camera on the market right now. The only thing better, really, in my opinion, and this is a personal preference, is the RX1. And then, of course, the A7R, which is different, and I hope to review for all of you, but has disadvantages. By the way, the shutter noise, I can't believe I've gone through this whole review, but I really don't find this to be something, an area of contention. So many people have complained about the shutter noise, which I'm going to let you hear right now. See if I can get this to take a shot. And the shutter noise, I really don't, no, I spoke over it. Hold on a second. The shutter noise, I really don't consider to be an issue because please, someone show me a full frame camera that doesn't make noise. So there you have it. And the A7R is a little bit louder because of that whole issue with the electronic, the curtain. And that's, you know, something that, again, if you care about getting the most image quality in a camera, you won't care about that. Because, yeah, even though this is a great street photography tool and that shutter sound kind of kills your street photography capabilities, well, show me the camera you had before that was letting you do that silently in a full frame compact body. Well, the only one is really right here, the RX1, because this has a leaf shutter that makes absolutely no noise, which some people don't like. So really a matter of personal preference, but anybody that is going to really tell me that the shutter sound is a reason to not own the A7 or A7R needs to have their head examined. That's it, bottom line. And I don't care if you're a pro, amateur, it doesn't make a difference. This is something that every camera has, so why pretend like they don't? Granted, they all have differences in terms of the way they actually sound. This is not something to complain about on this camera. So, hope this review helped all of you in the market trying to figure out whether the A7 or A7R is the right camera for you. Even though I didn't talk a lot about the A7R today, it's really just this and then some because of that bump up in resolution, really giving you the highest resolution full-frame mirrorless camera ever made, and puts you right in line with the highest resolution full-frame cameras on the market. So a lot to like here. Expensive, but inexpensive when compared to the Nikon and Canon offerings that really don't even compare to the A7 or A7R. Again, hope all of you enjoyed this incredibly long review, but the A7 deserves it. This is a groundbreaking digital imaging tool. Incredible low light performance in the smallest form factor with a full frame sensor ever devised, and at a price point that even the regular consumer can afford. So again, any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.